Welcome to Accounting Life with Jotham Ty, a space where we'll talk about anything and everything surrounding the people that grind through your month-end accounting close.
I'm so glad to be here. This is always a great conversation, and I'm happy to play moderator today. We have our great guest, Natashe Castelli, founder of the Apta Consulting Group, and our topic today is the revenue accountant journey. I'm going to hand it over right away to our host, Gappify's CEO, Jotham Ty. Hey, Jotham.
Hey, Carmen. Thanks for the intro.
Happy to do it.
Awesome. Natashe, thanks so much for joining the show today. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Another day in paradise. It's Friday in wine country.
It's Friday, and we're going to talk about revenue accounting. How amazing is that?
It doesn't get better.
Well, I want to dive right into it, Natashe. And you and I have known each other for a while, but I love doing these podcasts because now I get to kind of ask like non-technical accounting questions and kind of keep it casual too. So I really want to learn about your revenue journey. And I think the best way to approach this would be to just like take it from the beginning. So I know you and I came from KPMG. So was there a moment in time when you were auditing, you're like, maybe revenue accounting is where I want to go next?
Yeah, great question. I sort of accidentally and maybe not so accidentally ended up on the revenue journey. So what happened for me is I actually started out in the Philadelphia office for KPMG, and I was put on a brand new audit client. So it was a first year audit, which is very different. It was a public company, which was big and scary. And we actually had some people from the Texas team, one of the Texas teams, come help us out because they had just lost a similar client. And so they had some extra resources to help us set everything up. And they decided to put me on as a first year on the revenue audit, specifically to put me on as the assistant on the revenue side. And so I was reviewing contracts, and there was this great woman who sat down with me, and I was like, I don't think I can do this. This looks really way too hard. And she's like, you can do it. It's great. Here's the template. This is what you're looking for. Ask questions. And so slowly I got comfortable reviewing contracts from an audit perspective. I was working with a great guy as senior at the time who had really great experience. And at the end of the first year, he sat down and said, hey, we think you did a really great job. We think it would be really great for your career if you continue down this path of revenue, especially knowing that I was from California. I eventually wanted to move back to California, Silicon Valley, and that could be a great skill set for you there. And I said, yeah, let's do it. And so then my second year was focused on the revenue. I became the revenue senior, or the senior in charge of the revenue audit the following year, transferred to the Silicon Valley office. Thought everyone was going to know revenue in Silicon Valley, and it turns out it's still a scarce supply. And so I got picked up for more revenue-specific audits. I had a bad week, as sometimes people do in audit. I started applying for jobs. And JC, the gentleman we worked both with before, recruited me as a revenue manager.
To say the least. Hopefully JC's not listening, but he knows he's interesting.
Yes, he is. He does know he's interesting. But he recruited me to Responses, where I became a revenue manager, which was an amazing experience. Always that transition from audit to industry.
Natashe, It's interesting to hear that story, especially how it kind of just aligned with like some also like moves that you wanted to make from a geographic perspective. But mine was different, and I think I know now why I didn't get into revenue, because when I did audit back at KPMG, my first two experience with revenue audits were 2 stinking restatements. So it was like work all night, go through 3 years worth of contracts. And back then it was like SOP 97 too.
Yep.
And I was like, wait a minute, this hurts. This is painful. I don't know if I want to do revenue accounting after audit. So that's, now that you mentioned that story, I didn't even think about, why I didn't get into it, because you know this very well. And this has been true for almost 15 years now. The demand for revenue accounts is really, really strong, right?
Yes.
Which is why I wanted to do this podcast episode. Like, there are folks out there, maybe in audit or maybe even on the GL teams. They want to get like a sneak peek to what revenue accounting could look like. So I guess just segueing to my next question there, Natashe. So I guess for someone who hasn't done revenue on a day-to-day basis, I would think it's like, is it just reviewing contracts and maintaining deferred revenue schedules all day? Or how would you describe the day-to-day of a revenue accountant?
So such a good question. It's so funny because most non-accountants think all accountants do tax accounting. And then when I say, right? And so,
Carmen, we are not like reviewing W-2s right now.
I'm a non-accountant here, so yeah. I'm sorry.
I'm so
taxes,
glad, right?
Yeah, I'm so glad you're going to explain this. I'm sorry.
Okay. So everyone thinks we do tax accounting, and not only do we not all do tax accounting, but there's so many specialties within sort of other types of accounting. And so I'm very niche with revenue accounting. And even within that, there's specialties within that, because you can have more operational revenue people. You can have more technical revenue, where you're really just writing technical positions, working with auditors on technical topics. And then you can have people that are more specialized on the front end contract review, working with salespeople, deal desk, which is sort of, in my mind, a combination of the two. Or you can do all three, depending on the type of company you work for.
Natasha, sorry to interject, but how would you break that down? Because that is pretty important there, right? So if you're someone who is, again, in audit or on GL looking to make a move to revenue, it's not just revenue, right? So it sounds like there's deal desk, to your point, and then there's technical revenue. And then is it RevOps? Is that like the new word that's being thrown around?
Yeah, RevOps is tricky because I think sometimes people also use that on the sales side. And when you look at job descriptions, they can be confusing because like chief revenue officer is actually a sales position. And so you have to be really read the description. But yeah, so RevOps, and then even like systems. A lot of revenue people I know are actually going into business transformation and systems because it's so integral to how we recognize revenue. So I guess, is your question to sort of dive into each of those and how someone might get into it?
So yeah, I think it's just good to recognize that there are different like subgroups within revenue. So if you want to choose a career within revenue, there's a few other like flavors of it to choose from. And I think that's why, and I'm partial here, like I think that's what's great about accounting. It really opens up like a lot of different doors for different types of people and personalities and skill sets and backgrounds. So like for you specifically, Natasha, like why? So you went more into the tech. Well, actually, I should ask you. Like, did you go more on the technical side? I think that's what you started with.
Well, I mean, great question. I think especially like where we were as a company for responses, you needed to be all of it. You didn't get to choose. You had to be operational, you had to be technical, and you had to do the contract review. If you look at a company like Salesforce, they're going to have 3-4+ people that are just technical revenue accountants. They're going to have an army of people in the operations. So you can really specialize even further as a company gets bigger.
I see. And I want to do a quick check on our moderator, Carmen there. Is your head hurting yet, Carmen? Or are you doing okay there?
I honestly, I find it really fascinating. And I did not realize there were all these levels just on this part of it. I really have this idea of how accountants are nerdy, math, and I'm learning so much here,
Yeah, well, Carmen, if you ever have any colleagues who are looking to get into the profession, I think that's one thing, that's an unfair stereotype of accounting, that it's all just like one type of job with one personality. I think in this day and age, there are so many different ways to advance within an accounting career. So like for me, I kind of took the crazy path of, doing my consulting practice and then now this software company. But I think starting like where Natasha and I started with the Big Four especially, it helps open so many different doors for you, which is pretty awesome.
Well, can I ask a question about the Big Four? Is that
Yeah.
I just have a question because I always feel like, first of all, I always meet really great accounting people that have great personalities and are not the stereotype. So that's a weird one. But why is there kind of a tension or a weirdness between accountants and the Big Four? Or is that something I'm just seeing?
It's not just you.
You want to take that one?
Oh, okay.
It's not just you. So, I first have to say, Big Four was amazing as far as getting me off to a great start with my career. As Jotham sort of alluded to, it gives you so many options and so many different directions that you can go in. And so I don't want to sort of discount the value there. I think one, there's a reputation of working a lot and not necessarily, they're not known for compensating super well. You get compensated through experience and through, mentorship. They have an amazing culture of mentorship and learning and training. And so that's part of your compensation. And then what happens is once you decide to leave, because often people do it when they're burnt out, it's common. That's part of the transition or the reason for a transition. But once you transition, all of a sudden you're being audited by the people that you used to be a part of. And that is a big transition. And you realize your perspective changes once you go into industry. You see things differently. You see things you didn't see before. And there's sort of a practical aspect that, in a theory, this is how we should do it, right? In theory, if we were perfectly to do it by the book, yes, this is how. But realistically, every scenario in industry doesn't fit into a nice, pretty box. And I think that can cause some tension. Yeah, and you have seniors who are like first years, second years coming to you to ask questions, and you might be, 5-6 years further along in your career path, and they're asking questions. You're like, okay, let me explain this. So that can be challenging, but they sort of hold the cards and hold the power to sort of give you a clean audit or not, or ask more questions or make your life more difficult. So that can be challenging to navigate.
I'll add a couple things about the Big Four too. Like the way I describe it is it's accelerated learning, right? It's like boot camp. You go through it, but to me, what I cherish the most outside of the experience and obviously being able to say I worked at a Big Four. And by the way, for the record, I was only at KPMG for a year. So I was not there long. I left when I was a senior auditor. But the amount of friends I gained in that 1 year is unmatched. I have it's probably close to 100. At one point I counted actually on Facebook, Natasha. Like a lot of the relationships that you form in the trenches when you're going through a restatement, an IPO, it's like, you can't take that experience away and you're learning so much too. Yes, Carmen is like 15-hour, 18-hour days, but I do not regret at all like my experiences there.
That's a good point. I mean, there's one friend in particular that I made that is one of my, greatest friends that I met. She was a year younger than me. And, I was the first year, she was the second year, and then I was a senior, and she was, she was taking over my tasks so I was getting new ones. And then, there's something about that bond. Some of my best adult relationships were made in those years where you're just working late and ordering dinner and getting coffee and just getting through busy season.
It's actually making me want to go back now. Sorry.
No, that was never explained to me. So I now understand that tension and how there's almost a hierarchy and you're all still under it, but you then learn something when you walk away from it. And that's pretty fascinating, actually.
And it's because of experiences like that, Carmen, that, folks like Natasha was able to kind of choose an option, a really viable option of pursuing a revenue path. And, Natasha, kind of just going back to that topic for those interested in getting into the field, like what kind of skill sets, actually, let me ask it a different way. Like if you had a time machine and went back to KPMG, like what skill sets would you develop to put you in a better position to pursue a revenue accounting career?
I guess, when I think about at Big Four, I don't know that there's anything that I could, it's sort of dependent on the opportunity. Yeah, you just keep working and you keep learning and you say yes to opportunities and don't get intimidated. There was a moment where I was the senior on a revenue audit for one of the biggest clients in the country. And I was like, I can't do it. And then I just, spent a day and said, I can do it. I've been doing it. I will be fine. And so I'd say, don't shy away from the opportunities. Keep working at it, keep asking questions, keep being curious. I think I was lucky in that I just sort of fell into it right away. I think for a lot of people, it doesn't happen right away. And what I've seen is people don't get that experience. And then there's sort of an intimidation factor. I didn't know enough to be intimidated because I was brand new. But I think over time, people are, I don't know revenue, or, it's that's not what I do. And there's an intimidation factor. And I would say it's not rocket science. It's not brain surgery. And the best way to start doing it is to just start doing it. Start reviewing contracts and ask questions, and you'll pick it up and get into the guidance, get into, you see something strange, start reading about it, and then you're going to learn about it. Start asking questions. And that's, I guess, maybe curiosity is a big one there.
Curiosity is, I think, something that a lot of like kind of newer accountants don't appreciate as much. And when you're auditing, just don't go through the motions of just like looking up the guidance and kind of writing whatever memo you have to write or completing the work paper that you have. But if you're reading a revenue contract, why not try to absorb like the nature of like the business transaction that you're reviewing, right? Try to learn and kind of apply yourself. And I would imagine if you take that approach, it's going to be easier for you to interview for a revenue job because now you have business context. You're not just going to say, "Oh, I completed work paper AB 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or whatever it is." You're going to be more, you're going to have more acumen and be able to articulate your thoughts better.
That's so true on the revenue side. To sort of be able to understand the business is actually a huge part of it. And you sort of referred previously to the typical accountant. Part of what attracted me to it is that it requires more than the stereotypical accountant, because you're interacting with salespeople and you're reviewing contracts with them and you're pushing back and telling salespeople no. And salespeople are their own kind of breed. And so you need to have a personality that can kind of stand up to that and be assertive and be on calls with the entire sales organization and say, no, we can't approve that because of this, or can we do it this other way? And that's its own skill set, which is not super common across accountants. And so I would say that's kind of another, if someone feels more outgoing and more assertive and likes to get in on the business side of things and interact with sales, revenue accounting is amazing for that.
You just actually hit on a pretty big point, like as far as a big responsibility of revenue, it's collaboration with sales. And what you just described there, you're really negotiating with sales to maybe structure deals differently. That way the outcome on the revenue accounting side is different. But for someone to have to develop like these negotiation and influencing type skills, I think is going to be an important quality, right, for a revenue accountant.
Absolutely. Yes, very important.
Well, so there's sales that you collaborate with, and they're a different breed to your point. So Carmen, this is like what corporations are. Like you have accountants, they have their own stereotypes, and then you have sales, they have their own. But Natashe, if I'm not mistaken, there's also a lot of collaboration with legal sometimes, right, with actual contracts. So what's that breed like, and what's your interaction as a revenue accountant with them?
Sure. Yeah. It's funny. I've worked with a few different sets of lawyers. We had a great legal team at Responsus, and they were very collaborative. And one of them even had an accounting background. So he made it really easy because he understood, he knew, he asked the right questions the right way, and he sort of aligned with accounting in a lot of ways. And we had a great culture there as far as that collaboration, and that was CEO down culture. But I've also worked for companies where that's not the case, and maybe the legal team is more sales aligned, and maybe there's 5 different lawyers, and I have one lawyer that thinks, only lawyers know the answer and accountants don't, we don't make any sense, et cetera. And then I have another lawyer who's, lockstep with me, and then I have another lawyer that says, the sales team is beating me up, I don't know what to do. And so it's actually, sometimes they can be your buddy. Sometimes you're working together in perfect step, and sometimes it's more challenging. I mean, it depends on the company, it depends on the culture, it depends on who takes the ownership of the negotiation process. But I think it adds another really interesting element. And in some ways, so there are some days that I'm like, I feel like I'm being a lawyer right now. I've picked up some things. I'm like, oh no, that legal language, that's a problem. You should talk to the lawyers.
Oh, Natashe, in the early days of Gappify, and even to a certain degree today, when we have non-standard T&Cs for our own sales contracts, like I come in and support sales with language on indemnification clauses, because I've seen that enough in my days. But yeah, it's really interesting. So like even when I first started getting into accounting and I was at the Big Four, I thought going into industry was like you get your cube and your plant, and then you just crunch away at spreadsheets. But what you described there is so dynamic, and I think that's something that is not highlighted enough in our profession. Especially on the corporate side, the need to collaborate with different people and different functions, and how important it is for you to execute your objectives through that collaboration. So this podcast is already like awesome because we just like surfaced a few things that people probably don't think and talk about.
It's true. It's definitely not the stereotype of what people think accountants are doing. Don't get me wrong, though. I love a good spreadsheet. There are days where I am in spreadsheet land.
That was great. So. There it is. Yeah. I've learned so much. I mean, just the idea of curiosity and also the collaboration between you and other entities in the companies, whether it's a sales force or the lawyers. This is fascinating for me. I just wanted to throw that out there. I had no idea, none whatsoever, about this other life of accounting folk.
Well, Carmen, you're in luck. There's way more along those same lines.
I'm just one kind of accountant.
Yeah.
Lots of stories, lots of jokes. And I think, again, that's something I hope this podcast like really brings to the surface. It's just as much about like collaboration and fun and these types of interactions as it is the numbers in our profession.
Well, I just think this has been an amazing episode, and I'm so glad that you're doing these, Jotham. I think this podcast is just going to be brilliant. It just changes the whole idea of what we think about the accounting world, and I think we need to have more of these. So thank you for doing these. Natashe, it's been great to have you as a guest, and I know we're going to have you back at a little future date here and have you on another episode. So I'm excited to see you again. And for everyone else who's listening, thank you so much for stopping by and listening to Accounting Life with Jotham Ty. And if you'd like to know more, please check us out at Gappify.com. And until next time.